Hello, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours, episode number 54. I'm Adam Coble. I'm glad to have you here. What is Office Hours? How have I found myself in this place? Where is the exit to this horrible, horrible dungeon? The answers to those questions and more will be answered in time. But for now, I can tell you this. Here at the beginning of your quest, Office Hours is a GM advice show. You go to my website, www.adam-coble.com. Click on that little Office Hours link. It's up at the top. Fill out the form. Ask me your question. Record your lovely voice asking the question. And then sometime in the future, I will emerge from the shadows with an answer for you. Today, 3 brave adventurers will get answers to their questions. I'm glad to have you here. Let's get started with a question about privacy.
Hi Adam, thanks for taking my question. I'm playing a game of Apocalypse World right now with my friends where I'm the MC. And it's great. I've never seen people have so much fun in a role-playing game before. I'm really inspired by it. Because we're playing over Discord, one of my players came to me early on and voiced his discomfort with streaming or recording. He just wanted to make sure that wasn't the plan. I told him that I wasn't aware of that, and he said that was cool, and we started the game. Everything was fine. Recently, one of the players revealed that she's been recording all of our sessions together. Of course, everyone patted her on the back because they were happy to be able to hear themselves, but the player who was uncomfortable came to me and voiced his displeasure. He said it changed the way he saw the game, and it made him uncomfortable. He didn't like that he was recorded without his consent. He also said that he was okay with the recordings continuing, but I suspect he was just saying that because he didn't want to be a problem, not because he actually felt that way. I know I need to talk to the player who did the recording, but I'm not quite sure what to say. And I'm not sure what else has to happen, too. What advice do you have? Thanks.
Oh, it's so awkward. Master of the Apocalypse, I'm sorry that this is happening to you. First of all, this is just like barely a game problem at all. This is like a boundary violation that happens to have a game like adjacent to it. And as such, I think it's worth being clear that this isn't something the GM should like be fixing. This is not your responsibility or job. This is a problem that the whole group needs to address together. It doesn't sound like the player who made the recording, egregious an error though it may have been, it doesn't sound like they did that with malice, right? This isn't like a, hey, I'm going to record you in secret. You know, this is not a Richard Nixon situation. I tend in situations like this to assume Hanlon's razor, right? Which can be phrased a bunch of ways, but mostly is just don't attribute to bad intentions what you can attribute instead to foolishness or a lack of thought. I think generally it's a cultural understanding in the modern Western world that being recorded requires permission. You ask first for these things. Certainly, changes in the way that many modern societies operate on a law enforcement level and the sort of constant surveillance of our data selves on the internet may gently be altering ideas of whether it's okay or not okay to be surveilled. But I assume in this case, we all don't feel all right about that, right? Listening to this question, I felt a very personal, like, ugh, blah. I felt a bad feeling. I can't envision a world where, without permission, recording a creative endeavor that's being undertaken by a group without, I mean, this person didn't even suggest that it was going to occur. I don't think that's something that anyone would be, I don't understand the people who are okay with this at your table. I would be pretty upset if I was a player in this game, to be honest, but I don't feel like it's an unsalvageable problem. Nor, Master of the Apocalypse, asker of this question, do I think that it's your job to fix this. It's a bit annoying that the player who is upset in this situation is essentially using you as a vent for these things. I don't know your relationship with them. Maybe your relationship to that player is a safer one than with the rest of the group, or they feel like they have some reason that's preventing them from going to the group with this question. But right now you're caught in this weird situation where you're the only one who's in on the secret that one player is not happy. And that's bullshit and not really fair to you, but I'm not going to judge because I don't know, like I said, your relationship with them. So what I think you should do about this, even though the group's feeling okay with this is not your job or responsibility to ensure, I think you need to talk to the player who was hurt by this action. Tell them that you're feeling troubled about the issue, that this is bothering you, and that because it's affecting their playing the game, it's affecting your feelings about the game, right? Bring that up with them. Do so without stepping on the fact that they've told you how they feel, right? Give them some space to feel like bad, but also acknowledge that, like, cool, yes, you want to try to continue playing. You don't want to be the person that ruins the game, but it's not your fault here, right? This is an uncomfortable thing happened, and it's best if you can all bring it up and talk about it. So ask them to speak to the group, or ask for their permission to start that conversation with the group together. Because if your group is willing to discuss this, you should be able to work to a solution and talk to them, right? Work it out, play together. If they're not willing to discuss this, that might say something about the game at large, right? If they dismiss this discomfort, or if they're like, oh, come on, don't be a baby about this, it's going to say something about your group, right? And you, as a participant in that conversation, you need to sit down and think about personally whether this is going to continue being worth it for you, because you're caught in the middle here. You're seeing all the awkwardness, and it's obviously, you came to me to ask about this, it's obviously negatively impacting your fun. So if they're willing to talk about it, great, cool. Have that discussion, move on. The thing here, I think, isn't so much that there's a worry about repeat performance, right? Like, I could see that the player who's upset might feel like suspicious, they're going to get recorded again, but if you're open about it not being okay, you'll at least have a chance to discuss the problem. Honestly, all of this just needs some airing out in public, which is to say in public for your group. It was a shitty thing to do, to record people without asking permission first. If you ask me, I don't really care that everybody else in the group is like, yeah, that's fine. I feel like an offense has been committed here and needs to be worked out. I just think that you have this player who is grudgingly pretending to be okay, or is being okay, but not for their own sake. That's what's causing this problem. And you're not these people's babysitter, right? The person who brought this problem to you early on should have brought it to the group. The people who recorded the session should have told everybody, right? This should come up, and it shouldn't be your job as the game master to mediate. A shitty thing happened, whether they know about it or not, and it's affecting everyone's game, whether they realize it or not. Whether out of fear or some genuine reason, the person who is being most directly offended by this can't go to the group, and now you have to. I feel like answering this any more clearly is going to require a more nuanced understanding of the social dynamics of your group, which I don't have, so I can't do that. But I'll say this. It feels to me like you need to talk about it. Just fucking sit down with your group and talk about it. Keeping all these things in a secret telephone conversation between these two people and those two people, and all of this hidden information is really just going to poison what sounds like a really good game otherwise. So I'm hoping that it's salvageable, right? Talk to the player who is hurt, ask them if either they can bring it up or you can bring it up for them, then bring it up and encourage everyone to talk. Use your GMing skills, ask questions that are going to lead people to answers, and just get it out there. And that's the best you're going to get, I think. I'm sorry I can't give you more direct information about this because I don't have what I need, but if you feel like it, send me a follow-up. We could do a part 2. I'd be okay with that. But for now, here's our second question.
Hi Adam. My question concerns introducing characters from player backgrounds. NPCs and situations that the character should know about, but the player doesn't really. And every time I do it, it just feels clumsy, abrupt, and just all out bad and messy. It derails the session for like 30 minutes before things get back on track, and it leaves a sore taste in my mouth every time I do it. It either comes down to the player not remembering what the hell is going on, and me having to go out of my way to make them remember, or I tried fixing that by poking at the players before the session, asking them things about their backstory, to jog their memory a little, and I came away with mixed results. So I think what my question is how do you surprise your players responsibly? Like, I like to do it, but it's one of my favorite parts of being a DM is showing something new and unexpected to the players. But how can I go doing it without losing them completely in the process and derailing the session?
This can definitely be a problem that can crop up in games that have no mechanical means of allowing players to author their own NPCs, right? If your game doesn't have a circles stat to roll, if it doesn't have relationships to add, if you don't have a create a contact style move, it means that in that game, fundamentally, creation and introduction of NPCs is entirely the responsibility of the game master. So you can run into the situation that Chris is describing when you have a cool NPC that you want to introduce and you want that introduction to be a meaningful surprise with some kind of narrative oomph behind it, some background. Now, player knowledge and character knowledge are different, not only in the sense that a character will know people who you're already introducing to the players, but they'll also remember things better than a player might. One of the worst feelings in a game is to have a big GMing revelation fall flat. It's like telling a joke, getting to the punchline, and nobody laughs because either you forgot to include a core detail in the story or everyone ignored it. So what can you do, right? You want to fill the world with NPCs that tie the characters to that world, to their own history, and to one another. And usually, what I think traditionally groups have ended up doing in this position is going the whole 12-page backstory route, where the players who give a shit will write up a novel about their character beforehand, and the players who don't care about this won't. The players who do it will be rewarded by having their character tied in to a greater narrative, while the players who don't write the 12-page backstory end up being disconnected loner weirdos who only know the other murder hobos that they work with. And I kind of hate this approach because it feels so lifeless, and even with all the extra effort, it can fall completely flat. If I wrote in my backstory back in session 1 that I have an uncle who's a barley farmer, do you think that I'm going to clue in 30 sessions later that it's my uncle who's the goblin skin man of Devonsville because there's barley grain at the scene of the crime? Probably not. Like, let's be real, I'm probably more concerned about what my flat-footed armor class is and how I can get a +2 sword to replace this +1. Even creating a deep and meaningful backstory doesn't fully solve this problem because sometimes what you want as a GM is to introduce a character who isn't already presupposed. You don't want to have to pick from a list of background characters from these stories. You want to introduce someone who would already have significance. And this, right? The heavy clunk of iron-shod boots on stone alerts you to the presence of an armored foe striding towards you through the corridor, his scarlet plate shining dully in the torchlight like a pool of wet blood. Oh no, it's the Red Destroyer, what shall we do? That's a lot more satisfying than the heavy clunk of iron-shod boots on stone alerts you to the presence of an armored foe striding towards you through the corridor, his scarlet plate shining dully in the torchlight like a pool of wet blood. Wait, who's this guy again? Do we know this guy? What's his name? The Crimson Nastiness. I'm sorry, was this guy from your backstory? Is he's your nephew, right? No, oh no, he's this okay. Right? It's like a deflating balloon. It's no fun for anybody, and the drama just disintegrates out of the moment. And that's not okay. It's so like he's just some guy, some scary guy. And the appeal of this moment, the thing you're really looking for here, I think, is letting your players have this revelation themselves, right? Instead of telling them why they should be scared or excited or happy or whatever you want, you want to show them things in the world and have them put the clues together themselves. You can witness a revelation, not feed them all the clues and have to tell them why they're significant. And this is very difficult to do. It requires, I think, patience, first and foremost, and a slightly different point of view. So if I were in your situation, feeling that desire, what I would do would be take it real slow, right? Treat your players like an audience, not like characters who would already know the world. Like, yes, okay, that's true. They would, and they are, but the thing is that treating the players and characters like an inseparable fused object is only going to make this more difficult for you. So you need to think ahead to the revelation, right? Leave hints about a warrior clad in scarlet, leading an army that rampages the countryside. Drop hints about his vicious crimes. Insinuate the power of his demon-haunted armor. Talk about the fell blade of blackness that cut down the only survivor of Devonsville. Make soft moves, one at a time, to build up to that big in-person reveal when the players will put all those hints together for the hard move you make when it's go time with the Red Destroyer. But how can you tie this into somebody's backstory? How do you get that dramatic moment when they finally drive their spear into the heart of the Red Destroyer, pull off his helmet, and realize it was Throndir's half-sister all along? Well, I mean, you can do the same thing. You know, you can hint very slowly over time and build up to that revelation, hoping they'll work it out at exactly the right moment. But this shit is so hard as to be nearly pointless, because if you're too subtle, they'll miss the point together. They'll sit there, they'll pull the helmet off, and you'll have to be like, guys, it's his sister because you said she had green eyes in your backstory. Remember her green eyes? You remember it in your dreams. She green. What? Why the fuck don't you remember this? I hate you. Or else you're going to be too obvious, and they'll get it right away. Oh, she has an elven cloak. It's obviously Throndir's lost half-sister. Yawn, let's go get a mind control potion so we don't have to kill her and have the big tragic death reunion. I'm kind of just over the whole idea of pre-deciding any of this horse shit. Here's what I do. You create the Red Destroyer, right? You build up the menace. You create your antagonist, and you have them stomp around the countryside, murder fucking their way from one town to another like a good, chaotic, evil monster. And when the players finally kill the Red Destroyer and tear off his cursed helm, instead of presenting new information, you ask questions. As you remove the helmet, Throndir, your eyes fall upon a familiar face. Who is it? And then, of course, Throndir, because they're thinking quickly and they're smart and they give a fuck about your game, they'll be like, oh shit, it's my lost half-sister. Which isn't quite the revelation you wanted, because you're relying on Throndir's player to be thinking the same thing as you, but this can be really fun, and it can surprise you too, because maybe Throndir's player has another cooler idea than you did. Now, this doesn't have to be for big, huge villains or whatever either. This can be any random NPC. Don't work so hard. Make your players do the heavy lifting for you. Ask leading questions like, you're pretty sure you recognize this man's tattoos from your time in Black Temper prison. How? What do the tattoos tell you? What do you owe this man for your safety in there? Or, the woman that you meet on the road has a faint scent of lilacs that remind you of a better time. Why? What do you remember? Right? This is retroactive backstory, right? You're not about referring specifically to events and things that they've mentioned, or if you are, you're doing so in a way that leaves space for current contribution, but creating a void that the players will fill with their creativity. Now, I know that it's not necessarily the revelatory moment you're looking for, but shit, man, without their help, this stuff is so hard to orchestrate well with an entire group. It just, I think if you can pull it off, it's more a fluke than anything. So as with so many other things in role-playing, getting your players in on the action can enrich your game, reduce your creative load, and give you a chance to be surprised and excited about little moments you didn't expect. Asking, who is this? And how do you know him? Or asking more leading questions, say, like the prison question, right? Saying, you know him from prison. You're allowed to bring some of that backstory forward, but leave room, right? And what this is going to do is train your players to answer in the moment without having the idea presupposed, and let them tie themselves to the world, which is ultimately the point here. I know that you are aching for the big reveal, desperate to surprise your players, and there are players who will enjoy that, but there are places that you can do it in the game. Backstory and history of a character is inherently the responsibility of both the GM and the player. So try to bend your usual tactics a little and let the player in on the game. Be subtle. Ask the right questions. And leave room for your players to surprise you too. Because you deserve those surprises. As much, if not more, you hardworking game master you, than they do.
Hi Adam, it's Ash, aka Asijiak. I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on approaching the problematic elements of the games you play? Different systems portray mental health, disability, race, and sometimes gender pretty poorly in their systems and mechanisms. As a GM, I specifically find myself coming up pretty hard against the fact that most games with traditional fantasy settings are particularly shitty about race. Games like D&D make it difficult to escape the idea of monstrous races, beings that are basically people apart from the fact that they are inherently evil or terrible in some way. I've made all sorts of excuses for this in my games in the past, but I'm increasingly finding that friction is too much. What do we do? Do we bend the games, their rules, and their lore? Do we love our games critically and make sure that we discuss the problems with them at our table so they don't accidentally misinform us? Or do we put down the games that we're playing and find something else that handles these issues better? If that's the case, do you have any outstanding suggestions, games that handle these sorts of issues well? Thanks so much for answering these questions. Your advice is always invaluable.
Thanks, Ash. Everybody, Ash is super rad. She made a game called The Republic, which you should definitely check out. Her website is machinespirit.net. Her and some other cool Australian folks have been streaming RPGs on Twitch as well. So if you're an Aussie or a Kiwi or just a North American with a weird sleep schedule, definitely check Ash's stuff out. Thank you for your super important question, Ash. And I think that we've talked about some of this shit like a bunch of times on Office Hours as part of other questions, right? This generally problematic, othering, colonial murder mess that D&D has a tendency to become. On top of that, there are games out there whose quest to be edgy or adult give us shit like World of Darkness Gypsies. Ugh. Other stupid, gross mistakes of the 1990s. Because a lot of what gets made in tabletop RPGs has traditionally been made by folks who have enough privilege that issues of race, gender, or disability don't tend to be front of mind. The games that we play tend also not to have a particularly nuanced way of handling or addressing or even just considering those issues. Additionally, there are a lot of very vocal, angry nerds that tend to lash out at game developers when they even suggest a real world or political issue in their fantasy games. Like, look at what happened when Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition suggested, just loosely, non-mechanically suggested, that while you're pretending to be an immortal, undying elf, you might also consider playing a non-binary, trans, or otherwise gender non-conforming character. Absolute fucking grognard meltdown. In addition, of course, to all of the queer voices praising the game for even daring to mention that this might be possible. In most cases, the pushback came from fans of Dungeons & Dragons who felt threatened by the idea of bringing gender stuff into their games was violating some kind of state of fantasy normalcy for them. That somehow the inclusion of a few small paragraphs was somehow a more political choice than ignoring gender completely. Surprise, ignoring a thing is a political choice too. I suppose the point that I'm trying to get at here is that unless the game itself is particularly a game about gender, sexuality, or racism, it's likely to have a problematic handle on it. It's amazing that we live in a world where games like Monster Hearts, Dog Eat Dog, Night Witches can all directly, intentionally address these sorts of things. But in many ways, the world of RPGs is still quite segregated in the sense that those games are queer games, or games about race, or games about colonialism. Ideally, the teams that make our mainstream, big-name role-playing games would be made up, in addition to the predominantly straight, predominantly cis, predominantly white people that make up those games, would include also trans folks and people of color and other people whose voices in tabletop have been traditionally marginalized, so that these things could be a part of the game without it being the entire focus. Every time a big RPG developer hires someone with a non-straight, non-white, non-male voice, the hobby gets bigger and better, just a little. Because, like, I think I get that we don't want or expect or think that every single D&D campaign should be about, like, gay stuff. Though, I mean, maybe. But also that gay stuff is just people stuff. You know? Acknowledging in the text of the game that a character might be a homosexual. Or that race is a more nuanced thing than, are you a elf? And that gender is complex and diverse in the actual real world, and that it should be in our fantasy too. It's all part of what I feel is necessary to make tabletop role-playing games as a hobby more open to more people. It doesn't have to mean that being gay gives your character +5 charisma, but it does mean that we should talk about this stuff in the text of our books, just to mention it, because we want to normalize that stuff. Now, there are games that do this really well, like Apocalypse World or, say, Urban Shadows. These games give us clear options around these things, right? What does it mean that your angel isn't a man or a woman, but transgressing? Would you have thought to make your vampire Southeast Asian without a prompt on the character sheet? But you don't change mechanically your game. Just by having those options doesn't mean that your game is about LGBT issues or race stuff. It just means that those things are an important part of your character's identity. And maybe you wouldn't have thought of that. That's what those paragraphs in 5e are about. They're about saying, hey, consider this option. Think about this. This can exist in the world of your game because it exists in the real world. right? I think generally, though, the bigger the role-playing game, the more bound to pre-existing fan expectation that it has. And the more likely it is to remain, in big ways, the same as it was. Because that stuff is a big factor in sales numbers. And if a D&D game suddenly was about gay stuff or perceived to be that way, I think that it would feel like a rejection, even though it isn't, to the traditional audience that D&D tends to bring into the game. So will we ever see a D&D that addresses the weird stuff that it does around like race and colonialism and monoculture and murdering the other? Probably not. But since people care about this stuff, and the great glory of role-playing games is that we get to make our own content, other people will make settings that embrace or discuss it. And if the mechanisms are too entrenched, they're just going to make their own games. Right? I often say, and I'm readily able and willing to admit this, the biggest thing I wish that we had done differently in Dungeon World, and I think Sage agrees with me, the thing that I wish that we had deviated from D&D more was address race better. Right? We just copied those bad habits that D&D had, calling race, separating characters by their culturo-biological lines. I don't like the way that we did it. I have grown since 2011, and I know more about how to handle this than I used to. And so I would do that differently. Right? Culture, people, whatever. Take a stab at pushing away from the reductionist stuff in D&D. So what I think I'm trying to say is that what we can do as GMs and players of role-playing games is take a good hard look at what we're playing, what the games say about the things that we care about, and whether their philosophical or political stance towards that stuff, intentional or otherwise, is something we can bend or modify, ignore, or hack out of our game. There is a hierarchy of shit that is important in playing a role-playing game, and being a decent person, making something responsibly that's fun for you and your friends is a topmost thing, right? Being a decent person is more important than the setting. Being a decent person is more important than the rules. What I think we have to do first and foremost is understand the games that we're playing. This is just a product of playing a lot of games and thinking critically about the way that they create narrative. It's a super important skill for every role-playing player to have, that critical eye and the recognition skill that goes along with it. It'll help us not only choose the right games, but understand why those games are right for us and our group. Now, there's a bunch of historically gross stuff in D&D if we look at it as objectively as any person can look at anything, as a part of a greater, similarly kind of reductive and gross thing that's present in a lot of Western fantasy. The idea that, like, we're forming a band of apex predator murder hobos to kill anyone who's not like us and take the things that are theirs is just kind of inherent to the premise of the game. But can you play D&D and not do that? Is it possible to play by the rules of Dungeons and Dragons and totally avoid its problematic aspects? I think to do so would require a massaging of the reward structure of the game and a change to the setting you're playing it in, right? Some of that latter work has been done for you. There are settings that try to make monsters better than just experience fodder, right? I feel like Eberron. I think Eberron tries to do this a little bit, though it makes missteps. And I've been trying in a similar way to do this more in Court of Swords, but again, missteps along the way, right? These things happen. But whether you want to put in all that effort or just go looking for a game that does it better already is up to you. There are certainly more hackable fantasy games out there that you could drift into a more socially responsible direction. The other thing I want to make sure that I touch on here is that you're allowed to just play D&D the way that it is. I know that I don't get to give you permission for things. That's not really what this is about, but I'm saying that I personally think, because you're here for my thoughts and opinion, I personally think that it's okay to just play Dungeons and Dragons the way that it is. In the same way that we're allowed to have fun with badly written crap games, we're also allowed to enjoy problematic stuff. I'm not saying like make a D&D campaign where everybody is a bunch of thinly veiled race warriors in a setting that's just a Nazi masturbation fantasy. Because if you want to do that, you could just play Varg Vikernes' RPG, but please don't give your money to racist trash bags. I'm saying that sitting down and saying, hey, so D&D does some weird stuff with how it handles race. Or, hey, so Malkavians, as written, are kind of a gross take on mental health. And then talk with your group about what everyone is comfortable with and how those things are present in the game. And then play in whatever way feels comfortable to you. We can like problematic things, I think, as long as we're critical of them and strive to do good besides. For example, I like rap music. I'm a fan of rap. I don't personally like that a lot of rap music's lyrics are sexist or homophobic. Every time a rap song uses a homophobic slur, I cringe. But I can acknowledge that that's a bad part of a good thing and try to listen to and support artists who aren't those things. I like black metal. It's a genre of music with some very serious racist stuff in its past. And I can still listen to it, but avoid bands that write songs about those things and support ones that have a better ideology. The same thing goes for role-playing games. We can choose to engage in things as consumers and creators responsibly. Pick the things we care about and what we put our time and energy into. And sometimes just playing D&D is okay. It's not a crime to enjoy a thing that has some messy ideas. It's good to think about and talk about that stuff. And just the idea that we're here having this conversation and it's a thing, that's progress. This is another reason to try lots of different games, because while I'm sure Wizards of the Coast would prefer that we just play D&D, there are games that are made by trans people, queer people, people of color that think about and deal with these things and kinds of topics, or just incorporate a better awareness of social responsibility into their designs because those things are a part of their life. You've heard me talk a lot. You've heard me talk a lot about why it's important that we get more kinds of people playing role-playing games, right? That diverse people bring diverse viewpoints to the table, and that a GM with a different cultural upbringing is going to have different stories to tell. It applies equally to game design, right? People who design games design them with their story, their heart, their lived experience in mind. Whether this game is a game about these things or not, that aspect will flow into it. Marginalized people who make games often have to do so alone or in small, more isolated communities. And we can support them by paying for playing and talking about their games. And that's a big deal. So do that. Everyone who cares about this shit should do that. Support people of color, support queer game designers, support those people by playing their games. Talk about how D&D has some messy stuff. Engage your group and your game communities at home and on the internet. Discuss, debate, make public these feelings. Cheer for inclusive design. Acknowledge poor choices in a way that lets the people who make these games know that there are folks out there who spend money and time on games that care about this stuff. Dungeons and Dragons will never be about social issues, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. But the more its publishers realize that there are people who care about this stuff, the more our voices say, hey, thank you for including those paragraphs about being non-binary, the more they're going to consider our point of view on this matter relevant. They're going to listen. And they're going to write about gender. They're going to choose more inclusive art. Shit, look at Pathfinder in the last few years, right? Canonic trans characters. These things are starting to be a part of games. So let's just keep talking about it. But let's not imagine that just because something is problematic that we have to cut it from our library or from our game experience forever. Let's also remember that we don't have to tolerate bullshit, right? If these things, this weirdness in a game is too much for us to overlook, or we're just sick of handling it, fuck it. There's always going to be other games. And if those games don't work either, make your own. Thanks for coming, everybody. This has been Office Hours episode number 54. If you want to get involved in Office Hours, go to www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. Fill out the form, submit your question, and I will be happy to answer it in due time. We will see you again very soon for the next episode of Office Hours. Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good one.